Hope everybody's doing well. It's time for another online dinner party. We've got another amazing guest that'll be joining us. The temperature isn't too bad right now. It's 46 degrees and it was raining, which means it has been washing away some of this snow and ice that we've had. But I understand that there may be more snow and ice in the future. But hopefully it'll only be rain and maybe some freezing rain, but nothing that'll bring the powdery stuff in terms of snow or anything like that back to the earth and everything like that. Because I know for the last 2 weekends, I've not been going to my part-time job, which is a job that I've had for multiple years, actually, probably about 2 decades, if not a little bit longer, and all along those lines. But it is a cultural arts center here in Durham that I enjoy working at, and they've helped with everything from their film festival to their blues festival to a number of other events going on, even the poetry slam, and all along those lines. But the last 2 weekends, there's even a church that rents out of the building that is a converted church, but they've not had service now for 2 weeks. So hopefully they won't have to go 3 weeks without service and all along those lines. But I'm sure they've still been doing their faith conversations with their parishioners and everything along those lines, but they've not had the church service up in the classroom. And the veterans, I thought they were going to be there this week and they could have made it, but we just got our dates confused and all along those lines. But yeah, there's definitely been the snow belt up and down the East Coast. I'm going to find out where Steve's at and all along those lines. And a lot of people are excited about the upcoming Super Bowl and even the upcoming Winter Olympics. I don't have any dog in this particular fight, even though Derek May did play his college ball here in the Carolinas, that is now the quarterback for the New England Patriots. But I also know some friends that are very much into Seattle, and Seattle and New England both have great teams. So it ought to be a good Super Bowl. And I'm even thinking a good Super Bowl halftime show, even though some people are up in arms about Bad Bunny being picked. But I actually like some of Bad Bunny's music and all along those lines. So we'll see how that all goes and who they pick to do the national anthem and everything in that space. And we've got the Winter Olympics coming up. And I understand that even though she suffered a very bad injury, Lindsey Vonn, who is one of those leaders, and that's what we're going to talk about with Steve Williams, is not going to let something like some broken bones stop her from going for the Olympics. She said she's still going to compete, and she's going to be competing in skiing. So I'm going like, hopefully she doesn't break the bones again and everything like that. But she's already said she's going to compete, and those games are coming up very shortly. So Steve, glad to have you here with me and everything along those lines. You've been looking at some world leaders, including some past world leaders, and getting some life lessons and some business leaders lessons from them. I saw that you got some lessons from Catherine the Great, and some people only know of Catherine the Great because of her misstep with a certain animal and all along those lines. And some people even saw some lessons from, I think, Attila the Hun and some other folks as well. So I can't wait to hear about some of these lessons that you learned from some of these figures, including some notorious figures and all along those lines. So do you have any thoughts about the weather? Is it snowing where you are? Because I know that the snow has hit a lot of the nation. I think at one point we had maybe 70% of the nation under some sort of winter watch or something like that. So I don't know where you're at and whether it's been hitting you, but I know if you're out in the West Coast, because my good friend who I do one of the other shows with, the World Edition, and I help him with his own show and everything like that. Rick Rosner lives in California, and he's not been getting snow where he's at, but other places have. So how are you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing well, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm in the Midwest. I'm in Wisconsin, and about a week ago, we had a number of days where it was the air temperature was minus 25 and the wind chill was minus 40. So we've had a cold snap here.
Yeah, y'all definitely had a cold snap, and I actually have some history with Wisconsin. Actually, one of my guests last week, and he's a good artist here, William Paul Thomas. He's from Wisconsin. He actually lived in Whitewater, and if you've
Ah,
watched this show or been involved in Scene Pod TV in the past, I actually have my college degree from Marquette University. So I'm an
yep.
avid Golden Eagle fan and an avid fan of when I was in school, they were the Warriors, and
The
now I'm waiting to
Warriors.
see
That's
what
right.
Doc Rivers can do with if he's going to keep the Greek Freak around or not. Because I think the deadline is today or tomorrow as to whether he's going to be sticking around or whether he's going to go to a more championship pedigree team. I know he brought Milwaukee one championship, but that was before Doc got there, and I think he wants to get one or more championships before his career ends, and he's got plenty of playing time left in his career. But I'm hoping that he stays in Milwaukee, and he's saying that he would like to stay in Milwaukee, and that would be a rarity. He and Steve Curry and maybe a few others are the few that have stayed with their teams the entire time.
Absolutely. We're all hoping for Giannis to stick around. He, we've had a number of times where, with the Packers and the Brewers and the Bucks, where we've got one championship, we should have had a whole bunch more, and then it kind of fell apart. So I could understand him leaving, but I really hope he stays.
Yeah, I hope he stays too and everything. Speaking of people staying, one of the things I've talked about, and I had the pleasure of meeting somebody that actually knew him, I think from his VCU days or maybe his Texas days, because we have a program every December. It's a Kwanzaa celebration. And I think it was 2 Kwanzaas ago, I met somebody because I had my Marquette shirt on, and they recognized that I had some affiliations with Marquette, and I've actually done stuff with our alumni association here in this area and all along those lines. But some people, when it comes to leadership, are wondering, is Shaka Smart making a mistake because they're not having a great year this year, even though they still got some time to turn the ship around, and maybe they can get an NIT bid or maybe even shock the world and win the tournament and get an NCAA bid. But that would be a shock of the world when they're in the near bottom and all along those lines. But he's one of those people, when it comes to leadership, he wants to build a culture of winning and get these young men to be able to take their skills into the working world and all along those lines. So he talks about building a culture, and I know other coaches talk about that as well. And that's part of the reason he's not a big fan of the NIL and going into the transfer portal along those lines. But I just wanted your take of him as a leader and everything like that, because everything I've seen, even when he was at VCU and when he was at Texas, it does seem like he's more worried about building character in his athletes and that they can carry on into the workforce, whether they go into business, whether they go into coaching, whether they go into some other field.
Mark, I think that's, I give him a lot of credit, because a lot of coaches don't take that path. They're more concerned about, winning games and not really developing their kids to survive in the real world. And I give him a lot of credit. And that's a true mark of a leader. Matter of fact, I use one of the examples in the book from my experience. I'm a sports fan. I spent a lot of time in Chicago, so I was a Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan fan. And, Phil Jackson was the same kind of coach. Right. He was more concerned about, how do I get my players to, work together better? And it's not just about the Michael Jordan show. It's about how do we get all these other players working together for a unified goal of playing together, building a championship team, and maintaining it. And I think he's got that same attitude.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he's got that attitude. And like he said before, you might take some lumps. There might be years that you don't do all that well, or there'll definitely be some games that you don't do all that well, but it's about building that character. And I've even heard some of his athletes talk about that, because he's also willing to take a chance on those that might not get their shot in other places. I mean, everybody is saying that Nigel James, he lists him as 5'11", but he's probably closer to 5'10" or 5'9", which we know is not any sort of height for NBA kind of players and everything like that. And it's not really that much of a normal size for a lot of the big time colleges, whether that's the ACC or the Big East or a number of other players. But he's already taught them that, just go in there among the giants and also have that kind of ferocious spirit of trying to go for the rebound. And not the last game, but a good game, even though they lost it, but the game before, where they shocked a lot of folks by beating Creighton and everything like that. It seemed like some of these lessons are being learned and all along those lines.
Well, if you think about the very, 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 very small percentage of college athletes who actually make it to the big leagues, they've got to have a plan B, and they've got to be prepared for life, and they can't just bank everything on making the NBA or the NFL or Major League Baseball. They've got to be prepared for, the things that you and I deal with on a daily basis.
Right. No, there was no doubt about that. And that's one of the reasons that they created this network here. Pod TV is one of the things that Nick Palveda talks about, that he gets frustrated about, is that he really wishes our school system would teach fiscal literacy and some of the other hard skills that are needed in life. I remember even when I was in college, in grade school back in the 70s and everything like that, there were people that were learning home economics, learning typewriting skills, learning a number of other skills, as well as the skills that you need for life, including some skills around budgeting. And I'm not going to say that I'm the best person in terms of budgeting, but I'm even shocked sometimes when I talk to entrepreneurs and people that are in the business world, how many of them don't have an idea of their mission statement or a true business plan. And if it comes to a budget, it's just kind of like a catch as catch can kind of attitude. And that doesn't work for any business. So I was just wondering, as one that has done leadership coaching, what is your take on that? Because it seems like a lot of people have this idea that they want to be in business, even when we're talking about the athletic business or show business, but they don't know as to how to budget themselves. And like I said, that's part of the reason that Nick created this network, because one of their things that he and Kim advocate a lot, and Kim is the other founder, is fiscal literacy.
Well, first off, I'm not ashamed to tell you that I was the only boy in my high school that took both typing and home ec. And I took them because they were easy electives, but who would have known 50 years ago that those skills would be so critical today, especially typing. Right. I mean, you can't do anything without a computer. And, I was typing 60 words a minute when I was, 16 years old, and everybody made fun of me. But now it's such an invaluable core competency that everybody in business needs, whether you're running a company or you're working for somebody else. But to your point, I think people are they underestimate how difficult it is to start a company, build a company, and maintain a company. And, there's a lot of things that they don't teach you in school. You go to business school, they don't teach you the hard lessons that you're going to learn by making a whole bunch of mistakes. And that's kind of why I wrote the book, is because I made so many mistakes early on that I wanted people to be able to benefit from the things I really did well on and the things I really, was terrible at, and maybe give them a shortcut. And I really wish I'd had a book like that when I was getting into the business, to kind of give me a little bit of a heads up, not necessarily a cheat sheet, but at least some pointers on what to do and what not to do. And it's hard, as running a business is hard, and people underestimate the amount of work and effort it takes to build a business, to build a brand, and to create a flowing customer base.
That's a very hard thing, and a lot of people underestimate it big time and everything. I was shocked at some of the people that you chose as examples, and all along those lines. So I'd love to hear some of the stories as to why you chose Catherine the Great, because like I said, Catherine the Great is known for a lot of times for her mishap in life and everything like that led to her demise. And definitely there are others that are in the book that I think people will be surprised by, but that was one that definitely caught me off guard. So share a little bit about why you decided to go with Catherine the Great, and we'll get into some of the others also.
Sure. Well, when I started the book, I wanted to cover a great span of history, and it ended up being about 2,500 years. Oh. And, starting with Sun Tzu and ending with Steve Jobs. And Catherine the Great, I was looking for people that I took kind of an odd angle at it. I took, what can we learn from the bad guys and girls, right? Not the Jack Welches and the John Maxwells and all the positive role models. I was looking for people that were, notorious people that did bad things, that the first thing you think about is the bad things they did. But to be as powerful as they were, they had to be doing a lot of things right. They had to be good leaders. And there's got to be lessons that we can learn from them that apply today in our current environment. And one of the things that I really, really, caught my eye with Catherine was that she hit on a key concept that plagues, I think, every leader in the business, right? You worry about too many things. And what made her successful is she realized way back then to only worry about the things that she could control, and not to worry, kind of filter out the things that she absolutely has no control over. They may happen, they may not happen. And it's interesting because doing the research, I found a study that showed that out of everything that everybody worries about, it goes down in stages, but at the very end of the day, only 4% of them actually happen that are in your control. So why waste your time and energy on worrying about all these what ifs, and what happens if the economy, what happens with the political, administration changes and all the other things that can happen? That's totally out of our control, right? Control on what matters and what I can do something about.
No, that makes
Um,
sense. But you say that, and one of the things that I've talked about quite often on the online dinner party with various guests and everything like that is a concept that a lot of people talk about, not just my podcast, but other podcasts as well. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about it because it is one of those what ifs. A lot of us get caught up in the imposter syndrome because I can tell you that I have done that in my own life, whether it was going for careers or whether it was going for relationships, because I'm still in that single space, even in my 60s and everything like that. And I know that I have had that inner conversation with myself about should I go for this job? Should I go for that job? Should I go for this relationship? Should I not go for that relationship? And quite often, by the time I talked myself into it, the relationship had gone out the door or the job had gone out the door and somebody else had got it because I was having those inner battles with myself and
right.
everything like that. So, what is your take on that? Because I'm not the only one. There's a number of people throughout their life, whether it's in their school, their jobs, their family life, their relationships, that are having these conversations that are self-defeating, for lack of a better term.
I've done a lot of shows where imposter syndrome is brought up, and it's a thing. It's a real deal. And from whether you're a stay-at-home mom or whether you're running a company, everybody doubts themselves, right? Everybody says, "Do I really deserve the?" At least the good leaders are always questioning, "Do I really deserve this position or this job or this company or this role?" And I think you have to fight through that. And I think you have to look at, okay, why do I deserve this role? How do I come back and look at your accomplishments? There was a couple lessons with Catherine. The first one was focus on what you control, but the second one was work hard. And
Right.
that's one of the ways you can overcome that whole imposter syndrome is basically to outwork everybody. I mean, prove that you belong to whatever position you've ascended to, that I've had these accomplishments. And sometimes it takes you sitting down and writing out, here's all the things I've done in the last 5 years to help move my company forward. And just doing a simple thing like that can kind of reassure you that, you know what, I really did kind of earn this. And I think that's a constant conversation everybody has in their head. No matter how successful or unsuccessful you are, you think about those things.
Yeah, you definitely think about those things and everything along those lines. You mentioned and you call the book Notorious, and some of these people are definitely notorious and everything like that.
Mhm.
But one of the notorious people has some history here in North Carolina and all along those lines. So I've really got to ask you, and it's not oftentimes that I get a chance to ask people about pirates and everything like that, but Blackbeard is definitely one that is a person that had some notion of being a CEO because he was the CEO of that pirate ship and everything along those lines. So, what are some of the lessons that people can learn from Blackbeard? Because, like I said, I know that Blackbeard does have some ties to the coast of North Carolina and all along those lines. So, what are some of the lessons that you learned from Blackbeard?
Sure. I mean, my chapter on Blackbeard really focused on branding. And particularly, that's where I told the story about my journey through starting my company and all the things I did wrong and what it really takes to build a good brand. And Blackbeard, I mean, if you think about it, as a matter of fact, I did a keynote last week for one of my clients on the topic in my one sheet about the CEO pirate, Blackbeard, and branding lessons. And, you know, what we're all looking for is how do we distinguish ourselves from the competition? And Blackbeard was very intentional in what he wanted people to think about when they thought about Blackbeard, when they saw his pirate ship, and more importantly, when they saw his logo, which was a skull and crossbones, right?
Right.
And I I made the point that his is one of the longest lasting, most globally recognized logos in history. A guy in the audience, a good friend of mine, said, "Oh, Steve, there's one that's older than Blackbeard. It's the cross." And I said, "Oh, okay, I'll give you that, Dan. Yeah, you're right." But commercially speaking, I mean, you don't need any words. You don't
Right.
need any verbiage. You just look at the logo and think something bad, right? Blackbeard wanted it to scare his opponents and instill fear. Today, every time you see that logo, it's on a bottle of poison or something you need to stay away from. So
Yeah.
it's endured 300 years and it's still as powerful today as it was then. And I think that's one of the lessons that you take away from Blackbeard is you've got to be intentional on what you want people I guess, what emotions do you want them to feel? What do you want them visually to see when they see your logo, your company name, or your your face or whatever it is? What does that mean to them? And you've got to cultivate that very carefully, because if you don't do it, the market's going to do it for you, and you may not like what the market comes up with. So it's up to you to do those things yourself.
No, that makes a lot of sense. But speaking of branding, and I've got to tease you, and all along those lines, I don't have any. I've got some friends, including a lady friend, and everything along those lines. It's got several, and there are some people in the corporate world that are afraid to uh, create their own identity, whether that's having certain hairstyles, whether that's having certain tattoos. And I did notice the tattoos on your arm and your
Oh yeah.
profile, and all along those lines. So, what do you say to people that are afraid to be their authentic self? Because that's something else that we're hearing a lot of people talk about, is be your authentic self, and all along those lines. But some people are fearful that they have to suppress their authentic self if they're into, say, tattoos, or if they're into dreads or cornrows or a number of other kinds of hairstyles that are out there, and all along those lines, or even if they are men and into earrings, or even women sometimes as well, and everything like that. So what do you say about that? Because that's something I hear a lot of business people say, is to be your authentic self, but then there are times that corporate America tries to suppress your authentic self.
I say go with your gut, be authentic. I mean, whoever your audience is, they can understand when you're being authentic. I mean, I got my first tattoo at 45.
Mhm.
The same year I got married for the first and only time. So I was late to the game, and now there's very little white skin from my waist up that's not covered in tattoos. And I did it, when at 45, it wasn't as widely accepted as it is today. But now you've got cops, you got nurses, you got doctors, you got everybody else. And I think that goes to the point of just be yourself. If yourself is being covered with tattoos, or having piercings, or maybe having a brand that's way out there and may seem off the wall, if that's who you are, that's who you are. And I'd say run with it. I'd say don't be afraid of it. Don't run away from it. Run toward it.
No, that makes a lot of sense and everything. You mentioned something else, and I did not know that about you, and everything along those lines. And I'll get back to the leadership lessons as well. But for those that are in their late 40s or even 50s, or even like me in their early 60s and everything, that have not jumped the broom, as they used to call it, and all along those lines, but are thinking that they are too far past the game to either get married or have kids. You said that you did it for the first time at 45, which some people would consider that to be late. I know that my brother got married fairly late himself and everything like that. I think his second wife was in 30, and then at that time he was 40 or 39, if I remember his birthday related to when they got married and everything like that. But that is considered late. But he did have my two nephews, and so they're off going off to college, as he's about to turn let's see, well, he could be 56 this particular year and everything along those lines. So he's actually late to the game in terms of college kids and all of like that line, because he's actually a few years younger than me. So yes, he will be 56 this coming October. Actually, he's already 56, so he'll actually be 57 by the time the kid goes off to college and everything like that. So what is your take on those folks that are thinking that it's too late for them to do stuff in that space? Because I'm a big fan of people doing stuff late in life. I know that my dad is an artist, and he's got involved in his artwork. He's now in his mid 80s, and I want to say he really got active in his art when he was in his maybe 50s or 60s or something along those lines and everything. And his lady love is a dancer. She was a dancer and dance critic for a number of years, and she's a leadership coach. She's actually been involved in KIPP and has written some leadership books herself, Linda Bellins, and I'm hoping to get her on one of these shows at some point or another. But she is still an active dancer and is dancing in her I want to say late 70s or early 80s and everything like that. So what is your take on the notion that some people are like, once you get to a certain age, you need to stop trying to pursue your dreams, even if those are entrepreneurial dreams?
I say it's never too late. I really do. I come from an entrepreneurial family. My dad started a number of companies. My mom had a couple of companies, and once they got out of the business, and my mom kind of took a step back and just started to relax, she went back to school. She was in her 60s. She went back and got a college degree that she hadn't got before. So I mean, it's never too late. I mean, you never you never stop chasing your dreams. I know so many people that work their tails off and retire and kick back and say, hey, I'm just going to do nothing and enjoy it. And they end up not lasting too long after they retire because they didn't stay active. They didn't keep their brain going. They didn't stay engaged in things. I mean, if you want to make a pivot and change careers when you're 60, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And if it makes you happy, it's probably gonna, make you live longer. I mean, I encourage that 100%, Mark.
No, that makes sense. What got you into the business world? I'm gonna actually turn off this TV while you're answering the question and all along those lines. But just really quickly, what got you into the business world? Just to give you a little bit of my own background, I know that the first time that I saw business at a very early age, like you're talking about. My mom was a guidance school counselor when I was a youngster, and all along those lines. But my parents started one of the few true community radio stations in the country, in the sense that when I say community radio stations, a lot of the radio stations that are in the NPR and other affiliations are oftentimes associated with colleges and universities and things along those lines. But they started one in rural North Carolina that had no university background. So it was a true community radio station
Sure.
in a minority community, because Warrenton, North Carolina is also where the environmental justice movement started and all along those lines. So they started that. Actually, ironically, we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the nation, and they started that when we were celebrating the centennial. So it was around 76 that the station
Yep.
came on the air, and it was on the air for roughly about 10 or 11 years. It was on while I was in college, and a few years thereafter and everything. So I saw what it takes to run a very small radio station, but also the money that you had to raise, whether that was through the community or through going for grants and getting a number of other things. So it was a hard lesson. I used to sometimes joke, and I still joke, that as far as I'm concerned, they had three kids, me and my younger brother and the radio station. The radio station was the other kid and everything like that. But just tell me a little bit about your own business background while I just get off the screen for a minute and get this TV, because it's distracted me a little bit off in the background and everything. But share a little bit of your story.
I'm noticing that sun streak across the back. Is that distracting? Should I close the shade, or what do you think? So I'll just tell you a little bit about my background, Mark, while you're off doing that. I started out in the family business. I started out after high school working there part time before I was old enough, and kind of doing all the grunt work and the things people didn't want to do. And then once I got out of high school, actually escaped high school, I went to work for the family business for 5 years. So I grew up in the business I'm still in. My company supports the electronics manufacturing industry. So, this is 2026, my 50th year in the business. So I started out in the family business, moved to a number of competitors, and 22 years later, I went to work for my largest customer, which was a large contract manufacturer, which was a step up the food chain, if you will. And I was a global sourcing manager for this particular company. And my task was to put a team together that would go out and develop a global supply chain to support this particular company's growth. So we got to travel the world, and we got to see companies, from every shop in the US to every shop in Asia and the UK and Europe, and got to see all the things that, best practices, and also a lot of worst practices. So I did that for 15 years. And then I realized that there's a lot of companies out there that could use my particular skill set, right? I've been in the trenches. I'd been a leader. I've been running departments and companies and having people reporting to me, and I'd actually done the work. And then I got to see all these, literally 1,000 other companies and how they did things. And so I was able to bring all that to the table when I work with a client to look at, how do we improve their business processes? So I started this company 13 years ago, and it's fortunately been very successful. I'm still here. I've always kind of been a writer. I've been writing since I was a kid, but it was during one of those trips, I was actually stranded in 911 in China. And luckily it was at the very beginning. So by the time we were scheduled to come back, all the airports were open. So it didn't really delay me. But I had started a newsletter that went out to all my customers and suppliers and internal employees. And one of the editors of a magazine had saw it and said, hey, maybe this guy can write. And they offered me my own column in the Business Trade magazine. That was 25 years ago. So it also kind of prompted me to finally get off my butt and ask my girlfriend of 7 years to marry me. And that was, my current wife, and that was 27 years ago. So, it really was a progression from business and looking out and developing my skill sets and seeing all these companies worldwide to, okay, now how can I use my knowledge to help others? And that's kind of what I built my business around, is helping others through my unique eyes and perspective.
Now that makes a lot of sense, and it definitely is a great way to do it. Just out of curiosity, because I don't have any in the moment, but I have had pets in the past. My brother has dogs currently still. Mom was going to get a dog, and then she thought that the one dog was too big, and then she went with the smaller dog, but the smaller dog still had too much energy, so she had to give that dog away as well, and everything like that. But what are some of the business lessons that you have learned from being a dog parent? Because I did see that you don't have any kids of your own, but you and your now wife have two dogs, and I'm thinking that sometimes we can learn things. So I'm a big fan of even what we can learn from Mother Nature. I've actually got on my phone the Merlin app because I like to hear what the birds are in the community, and sometimes even identifying with them can be fun as well. But what are some of the things that you have learned from being a dog parent in terms of leadership?
Boy, I have never been asked that question, Mark. I mean, that's a first, and that's amazing. The front end of that earlier story is my wife and I were high school sweethearts in a long time ago, and she wanted to get married. I didn't. So we separated, and 16 years later got together. She was divorced with 5 kids. So I went from a bachelor to a dad of 5 overnight. And I've always had dogs. And, you can learn a lot from not only your kids. One of the lessons is learn from your kids. I might include that in the next edition, learn from your dogs. I mean, that's a great theory. I think I would relate what you can learn from dogs is what I talk about in a couple of the chapters is servant leadership, right? Mm-hmm. You're serving others. You look at a dog, you get unconditional love. I mean, if you go out to the mailbox and come back into the house, they act like they haven't seen you in a year. It's they've got that unconditional love where they're always giving, and they're really not asking for a lot in return. They're asking for some attention, but basically, they're portraying servant leadership to us every single day just by the unconditional love they show us. And if you can keep we got small dogs, you can keep a couple of dogs, happy. And I totally get the little dog thing, because we got one that you could throw the ball to her 24/7 and she would never get tired. So I get the energy part, but I think that they bring the unconditional love. They bring comfort. They when they seem to have a unique sense of knowing when something's wrong and that they need you sitting in their lap, snuggling up against you because you're not feeling the best, whether it's an illness or you had a bad day or whatever it is. They're very perceptive. We talk about perception. You have to be aware of your circumstances. Dogs are always aware of their circumstances, whether they know it or not. They're always aware of, their owners and their friends and how they're feeling. And I think we can learn a lot from our puppies and our cats and our whatever else pets we've got, because they don't have an agenda. They don't have anything that they're trying to accomplish other than make sure that you're happy and that they're happy. And I think there's a lesson there. We want to have fun at our jobs. We want to have the people that work for us, not have blind, allegiance to us. We want them to want to follow us. And I think dogs kind of teach us that, you don't really have to do anything except be there for them. And I think people are the same way. You got your people's back, they're going to have your back. Same with your puppies.
Yeah, speaking of blind allegiance, there was a leader that you mentioned, and he also has some North Carolina ties. Well, I don't know that he's got the North Carolina ties, but the organization has some North Carolina ties, because I think they come to the one of the big lakes here in northern North Carolina, if I remember correctly, and everything, because I know it's one of the groups that is affiliated with them, does that and everything like that. But what is a lesson that people can learn from the Hells Angels? I know that one of the Hells Angels organizers just recently ran and lost to try to be the mayor of New York, and instead Mamdani is the mayor and everything along those lines. But I know that trying to think of Curtis Silva ran. But then you've also, in your book, you mentioned Hells Angel Sonny Barger, who was also a member of the Hells Angel leadership and everything. So I do know that in the past, I want to say it was Lake Gaston, or it might have been Carr Lake, but they used to come up to one of the lakes here and have like a big motorcycle rally and everything along those lines. So what is something that you can learn other than that notion of unity in numbers? Because the Hells Angels definitely are one about unity in numbers and everything like that. So what's the lesson that you got in terms of leadership from the Angels?
I'll tell you, my wife and I rode Harleys for 13 years, and we were definitely part of the 99%. We weren't part of the Hells Angels 1%, but I loved reading, just ingesting everything I could about all the outlaw motorcycle gangs. So, before I wrote the book, I'd seen all of Sonny's movies, read his books, and, all the historical movies about motorcycle gangs. And you're going to really be surprised at this, I think, Mark, but the lessons from Sonny Barger, this guy ran the Hells Angels for almost 6 decades. And this is a group of some of the toughest guys in the world. And he ran that group so successfully because he didn't run it as a tyrant. He gave every one of the members a voice at the table. They would have, there's an activity called church, right? So that's kind of their leadership meetings. He'd get everybody into the clubhouse conference room, sitting around a table, and that's where all their business would be discussed, and things were voted on, and plans were made. And Sonny didn't just rule with an iron fist. He gave every single person sitting at the table a voice, and he would listen to them. Obviously he could overrule them if he wanted to, but he knew that he couldn't keep a hold of this group of tough guys, just by force and by, expressing, punishment and things like that. He knew that he had to create an environment where they were free to discuss their ideas, and he wanted people surrounding him that would tell him when they thought he was nuts and when an idea didn't make sense. And I think that plagues a lot of our poor leaders today, is they surround themselves with people that agree with them no matter what. And I think that's very destructive. Sonny wanted people that were sitting at a table to say, Sonny, that's a bad idea, and here's why. And they would explain it to him. He'd listen to them. Most of the time he would agree with them if the rest of the group members would be on board with it. So, the lessons from Sonny are, create an environment that encourages constructive dissent, right? I don't want a bunch of naysayers working for him, or yes men or women working for me. I want people that are going to push back and say, Steve, I think you're dead wrong on this. You're going at this the wrong direction, or maybe you overlooked this, or you're not understanding the consequences if we, go try to wipe out this other chapter of a competing motorcycle club. Talk through it, get all the ideas on the table. One of the things I've learned as a leader throughout the years is the more perspectives you've got on something, the better decisions you make. And Sonny knew that. And in the outlaw motorcycle, construct, that's such a foreign concept to think about the leader of the Hells Angels wanting other people to tell him when he's wrong and, changing course. So, one of the quotes I use from him is, you have to give your people the freedom to screw up. And coming in that context, it sounds crazy, but that's why he was so successful. He didn't punish people for making mistakes as long as they learned from them. He didn't rule with an iron fist. He listened to his people that worked for him, and they made better decisions as a group than Sonny ever would have on his own.
It's interesting you say that, because I was part of, here in Durham for a while, the Occupy movement and all along those lines. And that is actually kind of what they did as well, because they characterized themselves by being a horizontal leaderless structure, and they actually based a lot of their decisions on participatory democracy. And I remember being in a room where a lot of discussions were had that you're saying Sonny did with the Hells Angels and all along those lines. So they focus on certain actions, whether that was economic justice around housing or other kind of issues that they were interested in, including in wages and everything like that. But they were definitely a consensus-based organization and a decentralized organization. And some people found that to be a good thing, and some people actually enjoyed that style of leadership during that time in the before COVID. So it was like around early 2011, 2012 time that I was involved in everything like that. But it sounds like there's some parallels between what the Hells Angels were doing, and even I would argue probably what Occupy did, and even to some degree, even though there were some leaders, the Black Panthers did. But the Black Panthers did try to get votes from other members and not just the heads of the Black Panthers, whether that was Fred Hampton or whether that was other leaders that were part of their, even like Eldridge Cleaver and others. But it seemed like they gave space for there to be the development of leadership. And that is something I don't see enough of in business, is this notion of not having one head, but like you said, a bunch of yes men. So I just wanted your take on that, because I would even argue that maybe even the weatherman did some of that as well, if we want to go back into everything like that.
Absolutely, there's definite parallels, and you're right. I think if you look back and even our own careers, when I changed, I learned, like I said, I learned the hard way by making mistakes, and I started out as an autocratic leader, and I learned really quickly that really doesn't work in the long term. I mean, you can force people to like you and do what you want in the short term, but if you really want them to buy into your vision and jump on board and support you, they've got to respect you, they've got to trust you, and you've got to be able to give them a chance to have some skin in the game, right? Not just force it down their throats. They've got to have a voice in decisions that impact them directly. And I had to make a change. And you talked about, participative management. That's what it's all about. I mean, some cases, you've got to be an autocrat, like the military and the police. Right. I mean, you give an order, it's got to be followed. If you're working with a group of engineers, you've got to have an environment where they have a lot of say in what's going on. Otherwise, they're not going to listen to you. And both those styles are reverse, diametrically. But if you were to switch places, they'd fail miserably, right? If you gave soldiers the option of following orders or not following orders, it would be chaos. And the same thing if you try to be an autocrat with engineers, it's not going to work. But they work in their own lane, and you've got to be able to understand, I got to treat this group of people this way, and be able to pivot and say, I got to treat this group of people a different way, and be able to, situational leadership based on the circumstances.
But see, isn't that part of the problem, is that some people are coming from one field of leadership and trying to bring it into others. I have worked for a number of years in the nonprofit world, and I have seen some people try to bring that top-down kind of leadership into the nonprofit world when they're not given enough room for growth for the people in their stead that are kind of like underneath them. They might have some great creative ideas, and I've definitely seen the cases where they are trying to be the leader of everything, and kind of, what's that old saying, master of many, jack of none.
Right. No, so, you're absolutely right. And that, doesn't just apply to nonprofits. I mean, for profits, any organization you're with, whether it's your church or a community center or in a business or a nonprofit, you don't want to stifle creativity. You never know what you're leaving on the table if you try to force that, right? One of the other things that you learn talking about, going back to Sonny, is great leaders know they don't have all the answers. And that's hard for some people to acknowledge. You know what? I'm the boss, but I'm not the smartest guy in a room. And I've always tried to hire people smarter than me that work for me. It, fortunately, it's not too difficult, but I always wanted people smarter than me working for me, because if they want my job, I wasn't threatened by it. That means they got to make me look good. If they're going to move up, hopefully I'm going to move up. And I want the best people working for me. And you can't be threatened by it, and you can't take credit for other people's ideas. You've got to give credit where credit's due. Otherwise, you're going to do nothing but erode trust in it, and you're not going to be around very long as a leader.
That's very true. Speaking of being around very long and everything like that, what do you say to people that are, because I want to come back to Notorious. There is a notorious person that is out there that's been out there for decades. Everybody knows this name that I'm going to mention and everything along those lines. But some people are wondering how he became such a leader way back when and everything like that, and how he has remained relevant to this day. And yes, I am talking about Genghis Khan. So how does Genghis Khan, and what are some of the lessons that you learned from Genghis Khan? Because I mean, Genghis Khan, in a lot of ways, is a ancient version of what some people would say Putin is trying to do, and so some people might even say that that's what Xi is trying to do now, and to some degree, people might even put our current president in that category with his notion of taking over Greenland and other countries and everything like that. So, what are some of the lessons that you learned from Genghis Khan that leaders can pick up today as well?
I think, Mark, one of there was a couple of lessons that Genghis brought. One of them was building the right team, right? Having good bench strength in your company, your department, your organization. And I talked about hiring people smarter than you whenever you can. The other lesson that I think is even more important that Genghis brought to the table was the concept of shattering the status quo. And you think about people like Steve Jobs, and that's what you think about when you hear shatter the status quo, which Jobs certainly did, but Khan did it, centuries earlier. And he did not, follow the normal warlord, textbook of how to be that kind of a person. He questioned everything. He was not afraid when he captured a rival army. Most leaders back then would either, kill the opposition or
Right.
enslave them or whatever else. Khan wanted to learn from them, right?
Mm.
He was not afraid to learn from his competition. Maybe they do have better ideas than I've got. If there's something they're doing that makes the Mongol army better, I'm going to use it and I'm going to adopt it. He made a lot of his competition, leaders and generals in his army because he recognized that this is talent. And I don't care where it comes from. If they're going to buy into my vision, they're going to support me. I'm going to give them power and authority, and I'm going to use their expertise to make my army better. And that's what really, really sets him apart. And I think that parallels to today's leadership. I mean, most people, if you go to a company that's been around forever and most of the employees have been there for their entire careers, somebody new comes in with fresh ideas, they don't get a lot of attention because, it wasn't invented there, right? They didn't come up with the idea themselves. They have this tunnel vision that, what, our way is the best way. That's not true. You've got to have that fresh blood. You've got to have differing ideas. And, just because we've always done it that way doesn't mean that's the best way to do it. And
Yeah,
Khan knew that.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. There's another person, I don't know if he's in your book or not, but I saw a piece on 60 Minutes about this leader not that long ago and everything like that. And one of the things that some people think that if you're going to be successful, you've got to have some rough times and everything like that. And definitely there is no doubt that, and he helped the university that he went to win their recent national championship and everything like that. But there's no doubt that Mark Cuban had some rough times and everything like that, including having his electricity turned off, his credit cards cut, and he was actually living in a 3-room apartment with 6 roommates, and he had been fired from several jobs, including a software sales role, and once had 82,000 of his 84,000 stolen by an employee. So, do you have to go through rough times to be a leader? Because I mean, he's now a billionaire, but I do remember hearing some of these stories where he had gone through some rough times, and he's not the only one. I'm also a fan of Chris Gardner, which is who the book Pursuit of Happiness is based on, and all along those lines. So definitely there are some people that went through some hard times, and I mean, maybe they were fortunate to marry somebody rich, even though there's some activity about how that relationship was, because I don't think Bill Gates was all that successful when he started off and all along those lines, but he did marry one of my people connected with the university not that far from me, Duke University, because Melinda is a Duke graduate and everything like that, and she already had some knowledge of the business world before she got with Bill Gates, and now they're divorced and trying to figure out what they're doing with their Gates Foundation, and of course they're having some inner turmoil within their own relationship. But what is your take on, do you have to have hardship in order to be a success?
I can't really answer that directly, but what I can tell you personally is I have a lot more respect for leaders that have earned it and
Well,
made mistakes and had to pick themselves up. And, whether you're talking about, somebody in business or politics or whatever else that have been beaten down and got back up. I did a show not too long ago with a gal, and she'd ask us one of the questions. Y'all have to fill out some information before you go on the show, and she said, "I want a fictional quote from some character, can't be a real person, and it's got to resonate with you." And I picked a quote from Rocky Balboa
okay.
that talks about him having a conversation with his son, and the gist of it is that it doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down. It's how many times you can pick yourself up and keep moving forward.
Mhm.
And I think that is the way you learn. Obviously there's generational wealth and there's generational, family businesses where things get passed down and down and down. And, I've seen more times than not that the person that started the company has a certain set of values, and by the time it filters down a couple of generations, that's all gone, and the kids are in it just for the money, or the grandkids or the great grandkids, and they've lost the values that the original owner put his blood, sweat, and tears into developing it. And I think that makes you a better leader. I think failing is how you learn. I mean, if everything's handed to you, you don't know the consequences of not being successful because you haven't lived it. And I think that's important.
No, I agree that that's important, and I can tell you that generational knowledge is very important. And like you said, sometimes the wealth isn't always handed down to you, and if the wealth isn't handed down to you, then you don't understand the importance of it. And all along those lines, there is, and we have a famous case here, actually two famous cases here, and everything like that. But I know some people that are involved in the fisherman business down in the
Hmm.
coast of North Carolina, and some of those
Okay.
people that are in the fourth or fifth generation don't necessarily want to get into it because they've seen the hard work and they haven't necessarily seen the rewards and everything. And like I mentioned, I work at a cultural arts center, but next to the cultural arts center, not that far from it, is an African American newspaper that is now closed because they were on the fourth or fifth generation, and because there wasn't any tremendous amount of wealth that was coming into it, the great grandkids basically let it go, even though we know that the importance of newspapers and just media in general, no matter what your ethnicity is very important. But I think that by the time we got to the fourth generation, they didn't care, and now that paper is no longer existent, even though it had a rich history and actually had a rich history in the civil rights movement and everything like that, because they were part of the whole newspaper movement that helped get some of those civil rights changes made and everything. But I think by the time they got to, I want to say it was either the grandkids or the great grandkids, they were like, I don't see any money and I don't see any reason for me to keep the paper. So I'm out. And therefore the paper no longer exists. And I've seen that happen quite often, that people don't see the economic work. So then they bail.
You're right. And I'm not saying they're all that way. There's a lot of family businesses that do pass. I got my work ethic from my family, right?
Mm-hmm.
I instilled that in my kids. I've got millennials, and they're not living in our basement. They've been very successful in their careers because you raise them with those values that you grew up with. I've seen just as many examples where somebody starts a company, they grow it to become very successful, and their kids were not trust fund babies. They were made to work, right? The father and the mom said, you need to get a paper route when you're 10 years old. You need to get a job when you get out of high school before you come work at my company. We're not going to hand it to you. You got to learn your own work ethic. And then once you prove yourself, then we can talk about joining the family business. And I think I give them so much credit for that because that's hard, right? You want to give your kids everything, but you want them to turn out to be good human beings, and you want them to, in many cases, grow the business more than the original founder could. I've seen a lot of cases where a son took over, or the second generation or third generation, and the company skyrocketed because they brought all these brand new ideas, but it wasn't from trust fund babies. It was from people who did the work and went to college and got real jobs and learned everything about life that you need to learn to be a business owner, and they did it the right way.
That makes a lot of sense and everything like that. Now you've got the title, and a lot of people have the title of coach. And we mentioned Shaka earlier, and of course Dean Smith and Coach K and their predecessors have done great jobs as coaches and everything like that. But it is a term, particularly among businesses, that is oftentimes overused and everything like that. Not saying that you're overusing it, but I just wondering, what is your take on that? Because everybody these days seems to be a coach of something or another, and we do know that everybody needs a coach. Even the best coaches have coaches and everything like that. But it does seem like it's one of those terms that sometimes is overused. So what do you say to those folks that are like, what makes you the coach that I should come to? And do you sometimes feel that you are in a oversaturated field?
That's a great question because it is overused. You know, a life coach, a spiritual coach, a business coach, I mean, what I look at is credentials, right? Have they been there? Have they walked the walk? Have they done it? Do they have any? Like I became a certified John Maxwell leadership consultant, which allows me to call myself a coach. I've got the credentials to back it up. I look and see, okay, what makes them be able to make that claim, right? What can they teach me? And a lot of times, obviously they do have the credentials, and those are the people that legitimately are coaches. But if you look at somebody that just all of a sudden decided to pivot in their career and say, I'm going to be a life coach, and they have no background in it, that really does taint the word coach, is where I think you're getting at. Is there is, in some cases, a stigma around it, right? That we got too many coaches. Everybody's a coach, right? You look at Dean Smith, Michael Jordan. Well, I was a huge Jordan fan, right? I mean, he had one of the greatest coaches in history, Phil Jackson, another great coach throughout history. They earn their place. They've got credentials. They've got championships. They've got players they developed that went on to do great things. You kind of have to look at, why is this person labeled a coach, and do I feel they're really qualified? And everybody's kind of got to make up their own mind on that.
And you said something earlier that one of the greatest coaches of all, he actually created a basketball game and everything along those lines, or at least he's credited with creating the basketball game and everything like that. But one of the things that I can say about Naismith, and the man that the Hall of Fame is named after and everything, is that he gave room for other people to develop their styles and everything like that. Because the other university, well, there's a couple of universities, also Durham Tech, but the other university that is here in Durham, North Carolina, is North Carolina Central University, which used to be called North Carolina College for the Negroes and everything along those lines and everything. But John McClendon was a Naismith disciple, and he actually helped Naismith create what Dean Smith then called the Four Corners and everything along those lines. So
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yes. So some of these things that were invented, but Naismith was willing to give his assistant coaches, which is what I always admire, those that are willing to let their assistant coaches help them out and create plays. I mean, I think that that's one of the things that Belichick did at New England, and definitely some of the other coaches. I'm a Vikings fan, even though I went to school in Milwaukee. I'm a Vikings fan, but I've seen their various coaches let the defense coordinators get their opinions out there in terms of the defensive play calling and everything like that, because they know that they can't call everything. So they got so like the current coach of the Vikings was letting Brian Flores, who may go off to become a head coach himself, handle the defense, because he was a master person in terms of knowing defense and all along those lines. So how much do you think it's important for people to understand, not just to have the yes man, but to have people that they can trust in their various roles?
I think that's a core concept that goes throughout my book that you just hit on. And it's interesting when you look at like coaching trees, right? Mm-hmm. People that started out, Belichick, worked for, a number of top coaches, and now a number of coaches that worked for him have gone on to become great head coaches. And, we had one in, 2 or 3 of them in Green Bay. I mean, if you look at coaching trees, that's where that concept really comes into play. And one of the things that, I tell my wife, I talked about John Maxwell, and she goes, why are you talking about John Maxwell? He's not in your book. But a lot of the reasons the people that are in my book is because of what I learned from John Maxwell. And his whole philosophy is his famous quote is, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And one of the things that John preaches, literally, I think he used to be a pastor, that one of the things he preaches to all of the people that goes through his courses, it's like a year of intensive training before you get, graduated, is that the best way for you to become a better leader is to help others become a better leader, right? The people that are following you, that you're leading, elevate them, give them the opportunity to take their game to the next level, because you can't help yourself before you help them. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, isn't it, Mark?
Yep, totally. And like I said, McClendon coached, he created not just the four corners offense, but he also created the fast break and the full court press, which he developed when he was under the leadership of James Naismith when they were both at the University of Kansas. And then when he came to Central and everything like that, they actually had a game between Duke and Central. At that time, it was, like I said, the North Carolina College for Negroes. And it was a game, I think, between Duke and it was actually the Duke medical students, but it was still Duke had the big letter Duke on it and everything like that. And the folks from Central won that game, even though it was a secret game because it was at a time of segregation, but they won double in the score. I think the Central guys won 88-44. So they made a whole movie about that and all along those lines. But yeah, he was definitely one that Dean Smith got to, and he was also the first black head coach in professional sports when he was the coach of the Cleveland Pipers, and he was the first inducted into the Naismith Hall of Fame as both a coach and a contributor. So yeah, he definitely did a lot of great work, and the Central Gymnasium is actually named after him. So
that's amazing.
And everything like that. So definitely you have to have those lieutenants that you're willing to learn from, but they're also willing to learn from you as well. I can even say that my grandmother is one of those kind of leaders, because at the time that she was in Raleigh, and this would have been like in the because she passed in 82, so I think this started in either the 40s or the 50s. There was no African American library, so she created the first African American library in Raleigh, and really went knocking on doors, raising money the old-fashioned way, and everything like that. And that library still exists. And this year, they actually created an award after her and everything like that. So there's a Molly Houston Lee collection, and also a Molly Houston now award that goes to, like, I think. It might go, I know it's part of it is community activism, and I think part of it may be libraries. I think there's like a couple of different awards, but they all have her name on them, and they gave the first set out last year and everything like that.
Congratulations. That's amazing.
But I'm just so proud of her, the fact that she saw a need and she went out there, and she was actually in New York because she was one of the few minorities to go to Columbia University to get her degree in library science during that time of segregation. So she was like, I don't care. I'm going to go and shatter those barriers and everything.
That's right.
That. So,
that's right. That's amazing. That's a great story.
Find ways to shatter the barriers, whatever those barriers may be, and everything like that. So I was wondering, in your book, do you have examples of leaders that were breaking barriers and maybe doing unexpected things and everything along those? Definitely Catherine the Great, but who are some of the other leaders that folks can find in the book Notorious that might shock them? And is there a leader that shocked you, that you were going like, I knew he was notorious, but I didn't know he was a leader, or she?
Wow. It's funny. I get asked all the time who my favorite leader in the book is, and I said, well, it's like asking me which of my kids I love the most. It's tough. I think they all bring a different part to the puzzle. The ones that I think resonate with me personally most are Sonny Barger and Steve Jobs, because they lived during my time. I got to see them. I got to, learn about them. I actually got to meet Steve Wozniak. I never got to meet Jobs, but I met Wozniak and had a good discussion with him about Jobs. And so, it's funny, Steve Jobs, I get questioned all the time, why is Steve Jobs in a book called Notorious? Well, and anybody that knows anything about Steve Jobs knows that he was not a people person. I mean, there was a good Steve and a bad Steve. You go to watch one of the product launches, he's amazing. He's a genius. He's this and that. But you ask any of the people that worked for him, man, he worked them to death, and he did not treat them well in a lot of cases. And but there's some lessons to learn from that. It's how you treat people. And he was one that really, when I really did some research on it, and I think Wozniak told me he got fired like 3 times, with Jobs, and came back and brought him back because he made a mistake. But he was one that was really interesting. Another one was, I've always read and kept on my shelf The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and that was 2,500 years ago. And looking at his wisdom from back then, and how much of it still applies
Right.
today is just blows your mind. I mean, he was all about, building teams and having, leadership strength and having development of the next man up, if you will, and not just about winning. His philosophy, well, actually, that was a common theme that ran through all of it. Every one of these leaders, their first choice of action was to resolve things peacefully,
Mhm.
including Sun Tzu. He knew that, if he was able to conquer an enemy and not have to fight them and lose his men, lose their men, maybe equipment and other things, supplies, that was a win-win. And he would take that any time over, going to battle, because he knew he was going to lose men.
Right.
So he would rather try to negotiate a peaceful, surrender. And only when peace failed did he resort to violence. Blackbeard was the same way. The reason he cultivated this fearsome image was because people saw the pirate flag coming. More times than not, they surrendered before they even, drew a sword. So he
Right.
knew that he could keep the ship, the people, the cargo, the bounty, and it was a win-win. Napoleon was another one that you think about. Napoleon, and everybody knows, the picture of Napoleon with his, hand in his vest and everything. But he was truly, one of the brilliant strategists of all time. And you think about some of the things he did that were so far ahead of his time. People today are still using those tactics in business, right? Understanding your competition, knowing your enemy, keep your enemy close, right?
Mhm.
Those are things that people in business are still doing today. And it was just so fun researching this book. Every single character brought something different. And I had to find leaders that not only I could find examples of these lessons where they were successful in it, but they also had to relate to some personal lesson I went through. And I also didn't want to duplicate lessons. So I had to find people with unique perspectives on different things over this 2,500-year period, so that each lesson was unique, each person was unique, each story was unique. And one of the taglines I use is, sometimes you find the best lessons in the most unexpected places. And that's what I did throughout this book.
It sounds like it and everything. I'm wondering, is there any leaders? Because I'm gonna give you two that you probably don't have in the book. Maybe yeah, you do have them in the book, but they are considered notorious. But are there any leaders that you wish that you had in the book that you don't? And the two that I'm wondering, because I don't think I heard you have them in the book, but they do fit in modern day technology. Because some people would say that some of our leaders, unfortunately, are they are like playing the fiddle while Rome is burning. So I was wondering if you had Nero in the book, because Nero definitely had a certain leadership style and everything like that. But I don't think you had him. But I could see Nero being in the book, and I could also see, even though I don't consider him notorious, many people do consider him notorious, Malcolm X being in the book, and all along those lines and everything like that. So I was just wondering your take. Are there any leaders that you didn't have in the book when you were thinking about people that were on your wish list or on your thought pattern? Because you had like a sheet of paper with some leaders that were notorious, and none of them probably didn't make the book.
It's interesting. I always get suggestions for, if this is a second edition, if I do a third edition, maybe I expand it to 12, and who would I add? And there's a lot that have been suggested that I thought about. I think, I hadn't considered Malcolm X, but that's a great suggestion. It, it would we call him notorious? I mean, he was a great leader, and there's a lot to be learned from him. But did he really? Would he really merit the notorious tag as far as bad things that he did? I'm not quite so sure. I'd have to do some more research on him.
It
But
depends on who you ask, because I mean, he was a gangster before he became an advocate
yeah,
of civil rights and everything like that. So there are some people that would put him in that the same category because of the gangster background, just like they would put the Black Panthers and
yeah, I was
their
going to say,
leadership
yeah,
in that
Black
category.
Panthers, right?
And Fred Hampton, but then Fred Hampton also and the Black Panthers gave us many things that we use today, like the breakfast program and stuff like that. So
Yes,
it came out of their
yes.
work and everything. along those lines. But so there is a balance of notoriety and fame and everything like that. So, but I could see them being wanted to be included and everything. And like I said, I definitely have seen people make, and I don't think he's been in the book, but if I'm wrong, correct me, the parallel of Nero even to these modern day times, because some people are like going thinking certain people are fiddling and playing the fiddle while Rome is burning and everything like that. So Nero, I could definitely see being in that notoriety.
That would definitely be a good choice. I'd have to find some positive lessons we could learn from him though, and see what I could come up with. The other I guess area that I wish I had tapped into was the whole hip hop genre and the music and some of the early battles. I think a lot of those folks are brilliant. I mean, I've got to know through a couple of programs I know, and now he's all over the place, but Snoop Dogg, I mean, he's a great businessman. One of the shows we watch is The Voice, and he is compassionate and kind and offers the best advice. But you think about him as a criminal, you think about him as this and that, but he's a great businessman, and he's done very well in the business world. I mean, he would have been a great choice
in the entertainment world as well, because even on TV, I was watching. It's one of the police shows that he was a major person of, and all was one of the Law and Orders, I believe, and everything like that. The detective, so not just on The Voice and everything like that, but you could also use, because she played a remake of The Equalizer, but Queen Latifah could be somebody else in the hip hop world. They could definitely be interested in terms of her role and everything like that, and all in that space and everything like that. So I can definitely see her being there. But then you got some great leaders that weren't necessarily notorious. So maybe the next book can be leaders that aren't notorious but have fame and everything like that. Because I know here in Durham, we've got the lady that was Pauli Murray, that was behind the civil rights struggle and the Board versus Education and all along those lines. So somebody in that space, whether it was Pauli Murray or whether it was Jane Pittman, who was a fictional character, but definitely in that space of civil rights, or Rosa Parks. So maybe the next one can be non-notorious leaders, but leadership qualities from the non-notorious. But those are just three that popped into my head automatically and everything like that, that they would not necessarily be notorious. As a matter of fact, one just got a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Grammys. But in speaking of hip hop, Sylvia Rhone is a major person that was very much involved in hip hop in an early age when she was a youngster, as a leader of the label that brought us Grandmaster Flash and some of the early hip-hop artists. So Sylvia Rhone would be another person, but I don't know her background enough to know whether she was involved in the New York crime scene and everything like that. But if you want to go that avenue, a lot of people would probably want Biggie and Tupac to be in there, depending on their own views and everything like that.
I mean, Tupac's mom was in the Black Panthers. I mean, I mean, that would be a perfect fit. Absolutely. Yes. And he was somebody that, I mean, gosh, you could find so many lessons. He changed the music industry. He changed a lot. So, yeah, I've got a lot to choose from, Mark. I'll give you a shout when edition 3 comes out, and we'll talk. Yeah,
please give me a shout out and see who makes that list and everything, including some of the athletes that we've talked about, because definitely Michael Jordan could be in that list and everything. And even he had some notoriety when we look at his gambling addiction, but both him and his dad and everything like that.
Yeah. And that whole mystery surrounding his dad's death. You're right. Yeah.
And Tiger Woods could even be on that list with some of his relationship drama and everything like that. I'm sure you probably could learn some lessons from, whether we want to or not, from O.J. Simpson and people like that. So definitely there are some people that are in those kind of categories that could definitely be in the notoriety section of any new book that you come out. Do you have any idea when the 3rd edition will be coming out? I'm sure the publisher is clamoring for it.
Haven't even thought about it. I just, I'm the books have been out for a little while, the hardcover and the ebook and the paperback, but I've got an online learning program for companies that want to have their leadership team go through it. That's about the launch, and the audiobook is just about the launch. So I'm just now wrapping up this edition.
Come back to the leadership school. Is that just for for-profit organizations? Is it for nonprofits and for-profits? How does one take this leadership course if it's online, and what would be the benefits of somebody taking the online course taught by you and everything? Because it sounds like it's an e-course. So I'm thinking that they don't even have to be from here. I know one of the guys that's on our network is in Bangladesh, so he probably could even take the course himself and everything like that. So what's the advantages of taking the course, and what do they need for the course?
Well, I mean, all they're going to have to do is sign up, and I think it's for anybody. That the book's written for any level of leader, whether they're a grizzled veteran for 30 years, or they're just got their first promotion, or maybe they're not even a leader, but they want to be, right? So the online course, you get a copy of the ebook, and then it's 7 hours of leadership lessons in video format from me directly. And then there's worksheets, and there's homework assignments, and there's quizzes. And so it basically takes the book and turns it into a college course that, that you could take and get a certificate of completion at the end. And, there's so many things that you could, little bits and pieces. Every chapter or every lesson ends with 4 practical takeaways, just a little something you could take to work tomorrow and apply and start using it and see results. So I think the accumulation of all that stuff would make just about anybody, if they could pick up 3 things, it's worth it, because it'll make them a better leader. And it doesn't matter what level they're at.
That makes sense. As we get ready to wind down and everything like that, what is the core quality that you think a good leader needs? Because even now, whether it was the current administration or past administrations, or whether it's people in other countries like Xi or Putin, there are always people that are speculating whether they are good or bad leaders, and whether they are effective and everything like that. And I'm just using the political landscape, but we can also say the same thing in the sports and construction landscapes as well. Just use just 2 fields. But what do you think is the key qualities for a good leader?
I think if I could probably boil it down to one bullet point, I would say you've got to walk the walk, right? You got to go first. You got to lead by example, right? People don't follow great visions, they follow great leaders. And to do that, you've got to be able to have been there and done the work and worked your way up. Looking at things like, what plagues us right now. All of our businesses are competing with McDonald's for employees, right? McDonald's I worked at McDonald's. It was never meant to be a career unless you're a manager. It was a starter job, right? It was to learn, I got to be to work on time. I got to, you start your work ethic development, right? Kids coming out of college sometimes, feel that they deserve the corner office right off the bat with the 6-figure salary without putting in the work to, I grew up in an age where you had to earn that, right? I think we've lost some of that. So walk the walk, lead by example, set that bar high for everybody that you're working with, so that you're demonstrating through your actions what you expect out of your employees. I think that's the biggest. If I had one bullet point to take, it would be to go first and walk the walk.
Yeah, that makes sense. How important do you think communication is to leadership? We've kind of alluded to it before, but whether it's relationships or whether it's life in general, I think that is a leadership skill that is oftentimes misrepresented and not effectively done. And by good communication, I also mean good listening as well, because I think some people are good at the talking, but they're not good at the listening. So how important do you think true communication is to a good leader?
I think it's critical. I think it's critical. And you hit on something that I firmly believe in, that I talk about in the book throughout, is that listen more than you talk.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Leaders like to hear themselves talk, whether they're great leaders or poor leaders. They like to hear themselves talk. One of the I guess pivot points to me was when I was starting out. It was my second position of the competitor after the family business, and I was still an autocratic leader, right? And I was giving all these instructions to my folks, and the lead comes up to me when she didn't follow my instructions because something happened and the priorities of work changed, and she made her own decision. And I told her, you need to just follow my instructions. And she goes, Steve, You just need to listen to us more. And man, that was like an aha moment. I mean, she told me, looked me right in the eye and said, Steve, you need to listen to us more. And she was spot on. And that was one of the points where I thought, you know what I'm doing isn't working. I'm not giving my people a voice. I'm not letting them in on the decisions that are impacting them. And I got to give them some freedom. Like Sonny said, give them this freedom to screw up. If she changed the priority list for the day and it didn't work out, then we could have a talk about it. But she did the right thing. I mean, and I should have given her credit for it. I was too naive at the time to do that, but I should have given her credit for it. And if you haven't done that and made the mistakes and come up through the ranks, you really don't have that background to fall back on when you're trying to tell other people how to be a good leader. Communication is key. I mean, there's written, there's verbal, there's nonverbal. I mean, that can be as powerful as anything you communicate. You can't really teach charisma, but you can teach the skill set to be more aware of your circumstances and surroundings, right? I think charismatic leaders are born. People say, are great leaders have to be born? I say, no, this is a skill set you can learn. You can read the book and you can pick up so many different things. It doesn't mean that you're going to turn into a Steve Jobs or a John Maxwell or a Mark Lee, but you're going to be able to understand that, I know what works and what doesn't work, and I've got to lead by example, and people will trust me more and they will follow me more. And next time, I'm going to give them a voice at the table. And if I'm wrong, I want them to tell me I'm wrong. So yeah, absolutely. Communication is critical. You don't want a manager that just sits in a corner office and barks out orders. You want somebody out in the shop floor working with you, communicating, talking, understanding your concerns and what's going wrong with the process, right? You want somebody you can talk to. And if you shut down communication, you shut down progress.
That's why I'm a big fan of leaders that actually go into the field and actually do some of the work with their employees and everything along those lines. So I'm a big fan, like, of the construction workers, that their foreman actually goes in there and picks up a hammer and everything like that, and everything like that. That's just me. I'm not saying that every foreman has to do that if they're in that field, or every plumber has to go do stuff with the pipes. But I personally am just a big fan of those that are willing to get in the trenches. Even when we're having a conversation trying to pick a new leader for the nonprofit that I work for, a new executive director. And that's one of the questions that was asked, is what they would do if they found out that there was a conflict with community members or a conflict with other organizations. And their answer, I thought, was one of the best answers I heard, which is that they would go talk to them, which would be to find out where the rift had happened, what caused the rift, and what they could do to heal the rift. And another answer that one of the people gave that I thought was masterful, is actually the same person, was that if they saw something that was wrong in the room that needed cleaning up, that they weren't going to just bark for somebody else to clean it up. They were going to actually do some of the cleaning up themselves and everything like that. So I'm a big fan of that and everything like that. But just really quickly, and then I got one last question to ask you. But before I get to that last question, what do you think about leaders that, one of the things that I have been a victim of is that some leaders are too much caught up in their own leadership vacuum of believing their own story and everything like that, and believing their own narrative and everything like that. And sometimes they are wanting to how can I put it, have you go in their direction and not necessarily think about if that's a positive direction for your employees. Because I've seen a number of people that have leadership positions that are trying to have you live their dream and not necessarily learn what their employees' dreams are and everything like that. So I just wanted your take on that, because I've run across that in a couple of people that have wanted to have you kind of like become, I don't want to say servants, but kind of like follow their dream and help them achieve their dream, but they're not really looking at the bigger picture as to what your dream is and what your ambitions are.
Right. Yeah. I concur with you 100%. I think everybody's experienced a terrible boss in their lifetime, right? That exhibits a lot of the things we've been talking about what not to do, right? And that's one of them. I think, falling back on what Maxwell said is you've got to elevate your folks before you can elevate yourself. put them first. Don't put yourself first. I was recently asked about the leaders and where do you draw the line between morality and corruption and greed, and what's that turning point? And no matter what side of the aisle you're on, all you got to do is look at our current political situation, right? I mean, politicians, that was never meant to be a career job. I mean, it was meant to be the everyday guy like you or me taking a position for 4 years or 2 years and going back to our day job, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you look at people where they cross over is when they start to put their own agenda ahead of the company or the organization or their people. And that's where you really have to step back and think, wow, do I really want to follow this leader? Is this somebody I really want to be associated with? Because most times they're going to say no. And it's that fine line between, putting the company first, putting the people that work for you first versus putting yourself first. I mean, it still boggles my mind if you look at how much money we pay our politicians, and then you look at how many of them are billionaires. I mean, where's that money coming from? It's
coming from our pockets, and it's going into line their pockets. And like you said, it doesn't depend on which side of the aisle it is, because it's being done on both sides of the aisle.
Exactly. Like absolutely. We got to fire them all and start from scratch. Absolutely.
Start from scratch with real community leaders. We might have to have what was that old movie? It was somebody goes to Washington. It wasn't Mr. Bill, but it was something along those lines where they were going to Washington because they were going to be a community advocate and everything like that. So we might have to start having some more true community leaders, because even locally, we got a lot of people that get caught up in the kind of like the farm system. So that's the other thing that I find problematic, is that too often people are using local politics as a farm method in order to get up to the big leagues and everything like that. So I'm not a big fan of that either. Again, I've seen that with a lot of my local politicians, where you can already see in their eyes that they've got like sunshine and glitter in their eyes, where they're already planning to go to the state level and then the national level and then the international level. And I'm going like, well, you started off at the local level, but just keep it down here for a while.
It's a stepping stone, right? And they forgot who they work for. They work for the people. I mean, yeah, you're right.
They totally work for the people. The last thing I want to what question did I ask everybody, and I definitely want to get that to you, because that's something that I get. But before I get to that, the last question in terms of the interview that I'm going to ask is, well, actually, I'll do that first. I'll do the first question, and then I'll answer this other question. But the first question is that I get for everybody on the show is, the network is an international network. So I get all my guests, whether it's one guest or whether it's in some cases 4 or 5, to give me a message of positivity to share with our global community. So if you have a message of positivity that we haven't got to, that you would like to share and everything like that, and if you could tell people how they can reach you and get a copy of your book and leadership courses and all along those lines, but any message of positivity that you want to share with our global audience, because the network is a global network on Roku, Facebook, and a number of other places as well.
Well, I wish I could have thought about it a little bit longer, but I think that what I would say to everybody is to believe in yourself. Don't question your capabilities. Don't question, we talked about imposter syndrome. It's never too late to make a change. Don't be afraid to chase your dreams, whether it's in family, in business, in politics, and whatever floats your boat. Don't be afraid to change your dreams, and it's never too late. Always believe in yourself, because you are good enough. Yeah, that would be my statement to people. Okay. As far as the book, it's out there any place you can buy books. But if you want a signed, free autographed copy, it's at stevewilliamsauthor.com, all one word, stevewilliamsauthor.com. And that's where you can sign up for the blog and keep up to date on information and shows like we're doing today, and look at the latest things. Yours is going to be on there, of course, Mark. And again, I really appreciate this opportunity. I've loved our conversation. I think it was great and very intellectual. You made me think about quite a few things that I'm going to be pondering on over the next few days.
Cool. Well, that's what I love doing, is getting people to ponder, and it's all about having a friendly conversation. Like I said, it's the reason that I created the online dinner party. Is I remember when I was growing up as a teen, my parents would have certain friends. Unfortunately, some of those friends have passed on. They would play Bid Whiz and other card games, and they would just be having intellectual conversations of the day, whether it was around the radio station, whether it was around childcare or the rearing of their kids, including us, me and my brother, or whether it was just around stuff that they were seeing on TV and all along those lines. And I got the idea that if I was married or if I was living in a house instead of an apartment, and me and my spouse invited a friend or friends over for dinner. That's why I do it like around 4 until about dinner time and everything like that. And we were just having conversation and all along those lines. So whether it's me as it was today on a one-on-one, or whether it's a group of us having a group conversation, that's the nature of the show. And the show has been going on almost as long as the network, because I think the network is going to celebrate 5 years. And I think the show has been on for about 4.5 years. And I've had a lot of interesting conversations, including this one. And some people have made return trips. So hopefully you get a chance to make a return trip as well, and all along those lines. And one of the videos that I play at the end is about education. And I think I mentioned earlier, or if I didn't, I definitely mentioned on other shows, that my mother was a guidance counselor, my grandmother was a librarian, and my dad was a college professor, and all along those lines. But we know that sometimes the people that have the real secrets to education are those behind the scenes, whether it's the guidance counselor, the cafeteria worker, the janitor, or a number of other people. So a gentleman, I believe he was in Oklahoma, if I remember correctly, and everything like that, he created a award to celebrate the teachers, but also the support staff as well.
Right.
And he's been doing that now for about, I think, almost going on 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
So if you could just share the importance of education to you, and then I'll play this video, and that'll be what we'll do to get us on out of here. But if you can share the importance of education in your own life, and maybe there was a teacher or somebody that really struck a chord with you when you were working in your parents' business and everything like that. So, and maybe even a behind the scenes person, because I wrote a book, well, not a book, of a skit a long time ago called Confessions of a Buppy. And this was somebody that was didn't have a car, and they had to take mass transit. So they learned lessons by stumbling across the homeless person. And one of the last people that they stumbled across that taught them a lesson was the janitor in their office. And the janitor told them a lot of things that they didn't know about their own corporation. Because as we all know, the janitor and the secretary often are the ones that know the secrets of corporations and everything like that. So if you don't know that, definitely don't just discount them because they are in quote unquote lowly job, because a lot of times they're the ones that actually hold the secrets to the success of the business and everything like that. And that's both in business and in schools. So I just wondered if there was a person, whether it was a teacher, a coach, or somebody that was important in your own life in terms of education. And then I'll play this video and get us on out of here.
Oh boy, I tell you, I think, I've had so many mentors over the course of my career. I'd have to say my folks were my biggest mentors, and they gave me I'm from the Midwest. They talk about the Midwest work ethic. It really is a thing. And, I go to other cities all over the US, and it is, the work ethic is different in a lot of places. And, I think when I was in school, it's funny because when I was in high school, I hated school. And then after I got out and I started working, I wanted to go back to school. I don't know why, but I went back for my undergrad, then my MBA. And then I thought, you know what, there was a number of professors that I had as I was going through those various degrees. And I guess they inspired me to want to do what they do. So I taught at the MBA level for a dozen years because of the experience I went through with a variety of them, and said, you know what, if they can do it, I think I can do at least as good a job as they're doing. And I went on to teach for 12 years, and I loved it. I loved the classroom experience. I loved teaching adults. I was, in the evenings after my day job. So I don't know if I could have been a high school teacher, but I really enjoyed teaching adults because they wanted to be there. When I was in high school, I had to be there. That's probably why I hated it. But then once I got out, I loved school because it was a choice I made, and I wanted to go back. So, don't give up on education, based on your high school experience, right? It's a whole different thing when you grow up and become an adult.
No, I agree with you. Before, like I said, Gary played that video, but just to add to what you just said, I had thought about, because I only have my bachelor's from Marquette, but even at this age and getting ready to hit 64 in July, I have thought about going back to school to get my master's or PhD, because I think I'm the only one of my uh, immediate family, not counting my nephews and everything, but that doesn't have a advanced degree in terms of the immediate family. Because I know that mom's got a master's. I don't think she has a PhD, but she has a couple of honorary PhDs. Dad actually has a PhD, and even my brother has a master's and was working on his doctorate and maybe getting a doctorate at some point. So I have thought about going back to get a master's either in event planning or even like you talk about an MBA or something like that. And I may
Sure.
end up doing it online because, like you said earlier, it's never too late. So maybe I'll start doing those courses in 64 when I hit that in July and get it by 66 or 67.
I love it. I love
too
it.
late. So I thought about that. And to your other point, I actually ran track, was the world's worst person and everything, because I was like Charlie Brown. I always lost every race. I eventually recruited a friend that I knew I could beat because I wanted to beat somebody and everything along those lines. Unfortunately, Jimmy Robinson passed about a decade or so ago and everything like that. But I did recruit him because I knew that I could beat him and everything like that. But one of the things I learned was about networking, because I knew some friends of mine that were basketball players on other teams that I knew that I could talk them into staying on the track team or maintaining on the track team if they weren't on the track team. And I think we won 3 out of my 4 years, because the way that we worked in high school was 3 years, and you could also run in the last year of your junior high. So it wasn't a 4-year high school, it was a 3-year high school, but you could run 4 years, and we won the championship 3 years out of 4. Would have the conference championship, would have won the last year. It wasn't because I recruited Jimmy, but because we didn't have anybody that could pole vault. So we didn't have anybody that could actually get over the pole vault that we lost, because I think we only lost by a few points. But even then, one of the skills that I'm doing now, even with this show of networking, I developed that decades ago and have maintained that skill set ever since and all along those lines. So you can learn something from coaches, because they had a very simple method. Steve, you'll get this. You'll love this. The way that they picked their track team was they ran you, and they ran you some more. If you survived, you were on the team. So they had the survival mentality. So they would just run you like they do the what they call them, the suicides up and down the steps and everything like that. They'd also run you around the rural town and everything like that. And if you didn't die and quit, then you were on the team. So I did that to survive by perseverance.
Well, I mean, that just proves you've got heart and you really want it. And there's a lot to be said about that, right? I mean,
and that's what it was. I
think
wanted
that's
to be
awesome.
on the team. I wanted to be on the team at that time. I even had Olympic dreams, because I thought I maybe would try to be an Olympic athlete or a marathon runner or something along those lines. I haven't done much running since that time, but it was a high school dream. And maybe that's one of those dreams that'll come back in old age as well. Maybe I'll wind up doing one of them senior tours.
There you go. Yeah. I'd be cheering you on.
All right, cool. Well, I'll keep that in mind. Maybe I'll get there and have Steve cheering me on. He can be there with his wife and the dogs, because I heard the dogs.
That's right. I'll bring my puppies.
They can cheer me on. So let's check out this video, and then we'll get on out of here. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Steve. Looking forward to seeing you back on this show in the near future and everything along those lines. You had asked earlier, and I didn't respond to your email. Sorry about that. And everything
That's
like that. It was actually going live as we were talking. So if you go to Pod TV YouTube channel and go to Pod TV TV shows, you can actually grab the video from there if you want to grab it and share it and anything like that.
I absolutely will. Yep. Cross from all you. Absolutely. I'll let my entire network know about your show.
I appreciate it. So on this note, let's check out what they were saying about the educators there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and get on out of here. It was fun talking to you, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Mark. Me as well.
No problem.
I won't fold, I won't drop until we on top. Only going non-stop. I won't fold, I won't drop until we on top. Only going non-stop.
I want to thank everyone for coming to the 2020 TAF Awards. This was a show like no other, people. This is the Grammys for dignitaries, educators, and support staff around the state of Oklahoma and worldwide. We cannot do this without the support of the people. So we thank you, I thank you, for being such a dedicated supporter to this movement for the Teachers Appreciation Foundation. I thank you.
I won't fold, I won't drop